Hello, and welcome to our video on the early industrial revolution happening in Europe in the early to mid 1800s. In this video, we'll examine the background and causes, why the Industrial Revolution begins in England of all places, what some of these early innovations were, and then we'll look at what industrialization looks like outside of England as well. So let's go ahead and get started and look at the background and causes. So, what we think of as the Industrial Revolution really starts in kind of the early 1800s, but the technology change that prompts it starts before that. And the Industrial Revolution occurs when the use of power driven machinery is developed. So, energy sources are changing from humans and animals into machinery itself. And here are the things really necessary for the Industrial Revolution to occur. We needed things that improve transportations like canals. Railroads will eventually be developed that also prompts this transportation innovation. We see iron production and the factory system as the kind of the main things that will kind of identify the Industrial Revolution success. And there are some unique circumstances that really bring all of this about in the first place. We see an increased demand for goods and finished products. We see people that are ready to invest their capital or money into different ventures. Like that's a common thing in their country. We see the availability of cheap labor and people kind of moving towards cities during this time period. And then different technological innovations that just make production easier. So let's look at why England, like why England specifically did all of this really begin. One of the early reasons why this will start in England is due to this system called the enclosure system. So before all of this, land in England was largely communal. So if you had sheep, you could let them go graze kind of wherever as long as it was okay with the owner. And we didn't have a lot of fences. So you see in this picture here, people start to build fences during this time period. So what happens is that we have what's called the enclosure movement, where people are buying up all of this land and they're seeking to kind of increase agriculture efficiency, particularly through the rise of commercial farming. So these landowners are trying to mass produce food, but what that does is it makes it where the smaller farmers and the people who kind of had smaller herds no longer can support themselves because they don't actually own enough land to do those things anymore. So that's part of what shifts everything to people moving towards cities because they can't support themselves in the way they used to. But also, what it does is it increases the food supply, which leads us to a larger population of people. Another important factor for why England is because it has a lot of the natural resources needed for industrial production. So we see they have coal for the fuel, they'll have iron for steel and machinery later on, and kind of really importantly, they have waterways. They already had lots of different rivers and canals to generate power and support, shipping raw materials and goods. England also is unique in that the island is situated where no matter where you are, you're no more than about 90 miles, or even less in some cases, more like 75-ish miles from the ocean at any point in England. So, really, when you're looking at trying to navigate towards ports, you don't have very far to go. Now, you can look at this map here and see kind of where a lot of the natural coal deposits are. It's those kind of slashed lines there. And one thing you should kind of notice is there's certain places where we see more people gravitating towards than others. So you'll see in like Manchester, Liverpool, those cities become kind of hubs for this new industrial movement. And then there's some other factors to consider for why England. England largely is pretty politically stable throughout, this time period, especially when considering what's going on with the rest of Europe. They have benefited a lot from exploration and colonialism. They've built up a lot of money. And you've also got the kind of joint stock idea coming with the British East India Company, where the people are very used to that idea of investing their money into companies. And so we see the growth of private investment in things like banking and insurance. And we see that the government supports a lot of these initiatives because a lot of members of parliament are benefiting economically off these special interests. They hear about these different companies, applying for grants to, get started. And they're like, oh, yeah, I'll invest in that. And they have the availability of capital. And I can't stress here how important this is. And capital is really just it's the money or property a business needs to stay in business. And capital is not just money. It can be money, but it can also be machines or people. The fact that they have people who are specialized in areas and have skills to their advantages. So, just these different factors that all culminate together to create vast amounts of capital. And the fact that Britain's really promoting human capital. So these economic institutions use human capital like engineers, inventors, and early capitalists help Britain lead this process largely through private initiatives. So these people that, have an idea, they get it going and then people invest into it. And that's really one of the big reasons why Britain's so unique is the rest of Europe really isn't functioning in this capacity yet. Okay, let's go ahead and look at some of those early inventions that help get the ball rolling. So remember, the Industrial Revolution really starts with advancements in agriculture. It leads to a second agricultural revolution. And that's due to inventions like the seed drill. So Jethro Tull invents the seed drill, and it's you're able to just sow seeds more efficiently and evenly. It included a plow and several working parts that all serve different functions, and it increases agricultural production, which of course allows for more people. Next, you have the cotton gin invented by Eli Whitney, and it removes the seeds from the raw cotton and increases cotton production and really sets the textile industry in motion. And that's why we're able to start mass producing textiles. And you'll notice all these other inventions we have coming up, they mostly are there to kind of help with textile production. Now, just a little recap of what the textile process looked like before the Industrial Revolution. It was slow and a labor intensive process, mostly carried out in people's homes. And it was a system known as the cottage industry or the putting out system, where basically you got the raw wool and you had to spin it into thread or yarn using your own spinning wheel. And it took a long time to produce these things. The entire process relied on manual labor and simple tools. So when we do get the introduction of things like the spinning jenny, it really revolutionizes things because it saves so much time. You can spin multiple threads at one time using this machine. Now, the threads were still thick and they broke easily, but it led to higher textile production. And then eventually, Richard Arkwright is going to invent something kind of similar, but he's using a spinning frame and it spins stronger, thinner threads. So we see that people will save a lot of time and see the beginnings of mass production, which then leads to more innovation like the flying shuttle, which allows for looms to be wider than an arm's width. You can make them kind of as long as you like. And then the power loom, which automates the weaving process. And so we just see inventions kind of building off of each other. And just a reminder, all of these early factories are going to be built next to rivers, and they're powered by the water frame because the steam engine hasn't been invented yet. It will be soon, though. And while the government supported the use of canals to make trading easier, canal water is not swift enough to generate the power needed to really kind of like move the water wheel. So it always had to be next to a river, which was kind of confining. So when James Watt invents the steam engine, it is, really revolutionary for everybody. It's better suited for these factories. Now you can build a factory wherever you'd like, and it paves the way for factory production and basically the whole industrial revolution as a whole. And, thankfully, it's fueled by coal, this thing that's naturally abundant in England. And then there's this man named Richard Arkwright who uses all of these components together and he creates the factory system. And now you have clothes that are made outside of the home, set to standard measurements, and you're mass producing the same type of clothes all through that assembly line. And of course, because of all this, we'll see the coal production in England rapidly grow. So, coal mining was an industry that already existed in places like Manchester, but coal was mostly just used for like home heating before this. And then now you've got the need to power all of those steam engines. So, by 1800, Great Britain is going to produce about 80% of Europeans like coal that they're going to use for different functions. And we'll talk more about this, but mining is very dangerous. It leads to a lot of really bad health effects and environmental effects. We'll talk about that in a different video segment. But this leads us to our last segment, which is what's going on outside of England during this time? Are they doing any of these different innovations as well? And the answer is that yes, these other European states are doing things. And we'll start with Prussia as an example. So Prussia establishes the Zollverein system, which basically is just this united little conglomerate of German states. And those states are going to eliminate internal tariffs and trade barriers between the member states, creating this large free trade zone. And it allows for goods, raw materials, and resources to move more freely across German territories, which encourages industrial development and leads to kind of a rise in money for them. So, because of this, they're going to invest a lot more into transportation. So, they'll build more railroads, canals, and roads. And overall, it's going pretty well for Prussia. You'll see in most other places in Europe, though, the industrial movement moves a lot slower for them than in Britain or Prussia. So France is a good example. So France has a more gradual rise to industry. They do start to expand their transportation methods, but they're one of the early adopters of making trade agreements to encourage growth within France, which is something that's a little bit different. So rather than take the Prussian approach where they're trying to expand free trade amongst people that can like help them out, France is more concerned about doing things to help French businesses and industry specifically. So, not doing that. So, here's a map kind of showing you the progress of this time period. And you should see that the places that are starting their manufacturing in an industry, so the areas in green, they're mostly the places that have those large coal mining operations already there. So places that have coal, it's a lot easier to do all of those things than having to pay for coal to be shipped to you from other countries. And you'll see that it's mostly a Western idea at this point. So, in more agricultural areas, landowning nobles are still going to dominate the policies and social structures. In Eastern Europe, like Russia, they're slower to start industrializing, and eventually they'll have some state sponsored industrialization to try to keep up. But overall, they just don't have the innovation in the materials to do that. Russia doesn't abolish serfdom until 1861. And when you have serfdom, you're largely rural. So trying to get more people to move to cities was their goal to kind of industrialize like everybody else. But you see, it takes them a lot longer to even get to that step than it does for the rest of Western Europe. Okay, so that kind of lays the foundation for where everybody is early in this industrialization process. And in our next video, we'll look more at the kind of like working conditions, the social effects of industrialization, and then like long term consequences of industrialization. Thanks for watching.